Welcome in, I'm Artris, and in this video, I'm going to be giving you some tips and tricks on how to win your OP-10 Royal Blood pre-release event. The way that these events occur usually depend on your local game store. However, for the most part, they are sealed events where you are given 6 packs and you have to construct a deck of 40 cards based on those 6 packs. With that in mind, the deck you build is going to be very much up to the variance of how you open in your packs. However, there are some things you can do, some cards you can grab that will help you increase your chances of winning your event. This event's actually pretty important because you do get access to a couple of promo cards, which I think a lot of the community have been asking for quite some time. One of those being the promo buggy, the 7-cost 8,000 power body. That's actually a really staple card for the buggy leader. The other card you get is a new red purple law promo version, which is an abomination of what the previous leader used to be. However, maybe some people would like to add this to their collection. For the most part, stores will allow you to bring your own leader to play at these events, so it's very important to choose the right leader when playing these. Out of all the leaders you can choose, here are the ones that I think are going to be the best fits for your event. In red, we have quite a lot of options. We have Luffy from Starter Deck 1, so able to attach a Dawn to a rested character or the leader. You have Zoro from OP-10, buffing your entire board by 1,000 for only 1 Dawn. You have Dragon, which Dragon will allow you to attach 2 Rested Dawn to a character from your leader. You have Red Sanji, which I got cooked in the comments last time, but to be honest, this is probably the best leader to bring to this event. In fact, I actually brought this leader to my previous event, and I guess I withheld some information. I didn't put it in my previous video, but this leader actually is very powerful and it will allow your characters to have rush once per turn. I ended up winning my event with Sanji, so I definitely recommend this one if you're going to be bringing it. Then we have Shanks from OP-09. This is a good generic defensive ability, being able to reduce 1 attack on the opponent's side by 1,000 power, so you can counter out more efficiently, and over the course of a game, you do accrue more value because of that. In green, we have Kid, so being able to restand your leader for 3 Dawn and pitching a card is great for moments that you need to push for game. Then another leader that I feel is probably the strongest bet besides Sanji would be Bonnie. Being able to rest any character or leader for only 1 Dawn on an opponent's attack is very powerful. It's a good, strong defensive ability, and in this specific set for OP-10, I feel like a defensive strategy actually might be pretty solid. In blue, you have Croc from the starter decks that will be able to bounce a 5 cost for minusing Dawn. In yellow, you have Katakuri, which you're able to at least peek at what cards you and your opponent will be getting, but also more importantly, the Dawn efficiency for only putting 1 Dawn on your leader and gaining plus 2,000 power is very powerful. We also have yellow-green Yamato. I don't necessarily recommend this one, but the fact that this leader has double attack is pretty strong. Red-yellow Sabo is actually another contender that I would consider to bring to one of these events. It, I think, is a very sleeper pick and can really surprise people by the fact that it is able to heal itself and buff a character on your board at the same time. Purple-yellow Robin falls in the same category as yellow-green Yamato in a leader that I likely would not want to bring to this event. However, the banish on this leader does make it rather powerful, so it is worth considering. And then from OP-10, I don't really consider any of the new leaders to be worthy of bringing to this event, but if you are forced to use a leader from OP-10, I would consider Red-Green Smoker because you're able to restand Dawn if you have a character on your side of the field that has at least 7,000 power, and Yellow Kid if you lean more heavily into the Yellow Supernova subtype. Also worth noting is that some stores will allow you to play with the Rainbow Luffy, and if that's the case, then I would say anything that has a leader lock within the skill of a character, I would consider adding into the deck. Now, before we go over the specifics of which cards you should be adding to your deck, let's talk about the strategy as far as the priority of putting cards into the deck. And for that, I will reference the Grape method. The Grape method is a priority system as far as which cards you should be putting into your deck, and it stands for game winners, removal, advantage, protection, and everything else. Game winners are bombs or anything that will apply a lot of pressure and force your opponent to have to answer or lose the game. Removal, very straightforward, anything that can answer your opponent's board. Advantage is anything that will allow you to draw cards or deny cards from your opponent. Protection will fall under a couple of categories. I consider blockers, 2K counters, and counter events to be protection, so those are very important to add to the deck. And then finally, everything else can be your vanillas, or maybe some cards that don't have the best stat lines but have generically good effects that you don't mind adding to your deck. That being said, let's go over which cards you should be adding. Starting off for the game winners, to be quite honest, this set is very lackluster when it comes to bombs in the set, so what you see here might not typically be a strong card overall, but because the rest of the set is a little bit underwhelming, This is the reason why these are here. In green, we have the 5-cost 7,000 Smoker. What's strong about this card is that when it comes down, and it comes down rather early, it is needed to be answered almost immediately because of the banish effect on the character. Otherwise, your opponent either has to give you 2 cards to keep healthy, or they lose life that does not go to their hand. And that is very crucial for an opponent because then they are not gaining card advantage over the course of a game. And this card is very, very powerful because of how fast it comes down, and just the power level of the 7,000 is just too good. The second effect isn't necessarily what makes this card a bomb. However, if you do pair it into a leader like Bonnie, then this thing becomes very overpowered. In blue, you have the 7-cost Kairos, which has 9,000 power, a great stat line. You have vanilla stat lines here, but more importantly, you have an on play, which says return a cost 5 or lower character to its owner's hand. So the tempo swing that you get from playing this Kairos is very big and can actually turn a game around because of that. In yellow, we have the 8-cost Eustace Captain Kidd. It says on play, you may rest this character, trash up to 1 card from the top of your opponent's life cards. So yet again, a card that denies your opponent any kind of advantage. And the second effect says end of your turn. If your opponent has 2 or less life cards, draw 1 card and discard 1 card from your hand. So that second effect is also very powerful, being able to cycle your hand for whatever you might need, whether it be 2K counters or a better body for the following turn, gives you options and flexibility. What makes this a bomb, in my opinion, is the on-play effect, but also the stat line isn't horrible. 9,000 power is really strong in these events, and once again, this set is not necessarily the strongest as far as big bodies, so I feel like this Eustace Captain Kidd is actually at the top end of the stronger characters in this set. And then to round out our game winners, we have the 7-cost Trafalgar Law. This says on play, reveal a Supernovas type character card from your hand and add it to the top of your life face down. Then, if your leader has the Supernovas type, give up to 1 Rested Dawn to your leader. I feel like this is a situational bomb. However, there are a fair amount of supernovas in this set that you should be able to at least heal from this effect. The second half of the effect, putting a Rested Dawn on your supernova type leader, is likely not going to happen very often. However, it is relevant with some leaders like Red Luffy or Green Eustace Kidd. So because of that, I feel like this is worth running. What makes this a game winner for me is the stat line. However, you being able to heal at crucial moments will allow you to prolong the game and sometimes turn the tides around. On to removal. In red, we have the 2-cost Monet. Activate main, you may rest this character, give up to 2 Rested Dawn cards to your leader or one of your characters, then give up to one of your opponent's characters minus 1,000 power during this turn. This card is not necessarily a straight up removal in the sense of getting rid of a body. However, it allows you to trade easier into characters, so therefore I consider this a pseudo removal, and it's worth running based off of this effect. In green, there's an event called The Weak Don't Get to Choose How They Die. It's a 5-cost main or counter event that says KO up to one of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 7 or less. There are a lot of strong 7-cost characters, as you've seen in the game winner section, and so this might be worth running because of that. I will say that this cost is very steep for not adding a body to your side of the field. However, answering most of your opponent's biggest threats is worth considering this card for. Then in green, we have a 4-cost event called Radio Knife. Keep in mind that the translations might be off here from what is actually the true translation, so the name might be different than what actually is printed. However, this event, regardless, says main, rest up to one of your opponent's cost 6 or lower characters, then KO up to one of your opponent's rested 5-cost or lower characters. A very good cost for 4. Being able to rest a character and then KO a 5-cost is really nice. The trigger is rest up to one of your opponent's 4-cost characters. Then in blue, we have a 3-cost blocker in Marco that says on KO, return up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 4 or below back to their hand. So this is a good tempo play, being able to prevent you from losing life, but then returning a character that the opponent might have just played that turn back to their hand. So they have to sequence it correctly, but if this thing does stick a turn after that, then it's definitely returning something back to the opponent's hand. In purple, we have another costly event. I don't necessarily recommend running this one. At least it's not as good as the green event we just talked about. However, God Thread is still an event that you might want to consider. It's a 5-cost main, KO up to one of your opponent's 5-cost or lower characters, then add up to 1 active Dawn from your Dawn deck. So this will allow you to ramp and then also remove something from the opponent's side of the field. The trigger is also helping you ramp, adding up to 1 active Dawn from your Dawn deck. Once again, this is a little bit costly for not adding anything to your side of the field, but sometimes dire situations call for desperate measures. Then in black, we have the 4-cost Zoro. This is on play. You may rest up to one of your Dressrosa type leaders or stages, KO up to one of your opponent's cost 4 or lower characters, then place the top 2 cards of your deck into your trash. Now, the stipulation here, your leader has to be a Dressrosa type leader. There are not too many of those. However, you might have some situations where you do have a Dressrosa type leader. I do want to add this in here in case you're running like Usopp or God forbid you're running Rebecca. This does have a pretty solid KO effect, being able to KO a 4-cost or lower. This one typically will not be added to the deck though. If you are running Rainbow Luffy, this is one to consider. Then we have a 6-cost event called Liberation. It says main, if you have 2 or more characters less than your opponent, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with an original cost of 6 or less, and one with an original cost of 4 or less. So this will at least help you answer the board if the opponent's board gets a little too wide, at least compared to yours. In yellow, we have the 4-cost character Inazuma, which this is kind of a pseudo removal. It's a Dawn ×1 when attacking. Rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost equal to or less than the total of you and your opponent's life cards. So this will allow you to rest an opponent's character and potentially swing into it, causing them to either remove cards from their hand to keep it alive or just get rid of the body altogether. Additionally, if you are trying to go for game and there are situations where you have a fair amount of life and maybe your opponent doesn't and they have a small blocker, you can use this Inazuma to rest the blocker, and in a way that's like a pseudo removal. Then we have a 4-cost event called Damned Punk Electromagnetic Cannon. It's a main, look at up to 1 card from the top of you or your opponent's life cards and place it at the top or bottom of the life cards. Then KO up to one of your opponent's characters with the cost of 5 or less. The trigger is also really nice, being able to draw 2 cards and discard 1 card from your hand. Nice little card advantage there from life. This card I would definitely try to add into the deck if you can. Both effects from life and also the main effect are very powerful and worth running, especially at 4 cost. Then moving on to card advantage, there's not a whole lot of different ways to draw cards in this set other than what we've already shown. However, there are a few important cards that are worth considering if you can get them. One of them is the 3-cost Sanji that says your turn, this character gains plus 3,000 power, and on KO, draw a card. This will likely be a very easy target for your opponent to swing into, and you don't mind letting this die because of the fact that on KO, you're able to at least recur some card in hand and gain a little bit of advantage from that. In green, we have the 5-cost 6,000 power Enel on play. If you have 2 or more rested characters, draw 3 cards and discard 2 cards from your hand. So a nice little graceful charity effect there. However, you do have to make sure that you swing with the characters on board first. So that is important to do to get this effect. Probably the best card for card advantage is the 4-cost Cavendish in blue. It says when attacking once per turn, draw 2 cards and trash 1 card from your hand. This is a very strong effect, being able to filter out cards, get rid of the worst card from your hand. This is going to, over the course of a game, get you a lot of value. If you can protect this card, please do so at all costs. And then we have Basil Hawkins, which is a 4-cost 5,000 power body in yellow. The on KO is trash up to 1 card from the top of your opponent's life cards. So in a way, this is an advantage because you are denying your opponent resources when it dies. The other thing here is that the trigger allows you to draw 2 and discard 1 from your hand. So you have best of both worlds. Whether it's in your life or on the field, you are gaining some kind of card advantage. Onto protection, I'm going to split this up very easily. If you see a blocker, make sure to add it to your deck. Blockers are very, very important. The most key blockers, in my opinion, are the Sanji, which is also a 2k counter, but it does say on opponent's turn, this character has plus 2,000 power. The other one is the Frankie, which says on KO, play up to 1 cost 3 or lower Dressrosa type character rested from your trash. There are some cards you might be able to get back from the grave, so that is also worth running. Every other blocker here, if you do see it though, make sure to add it to the deck. As far as 2k counters go, here are all the 2k counters. I believe I got them all. If I didn't, well, if you see 2k counter on the side of the card, please make sure to add it. The most important ones here will be this green Tashigi though. When one of your green characters other than Tashigi would be removed from play due to your opponent's effects, you may instead rest this character, so some kind of protection as well as having a 2k counter. You also have the blue Sabo, which is if your other characters other than Sabo with original cost of 7 cost or lower would be removed from the board by its opponent's effect, you may instead return this character to your hand. And then the other one I would consider running here would be the yellow X-Drake. So you may rest this character, and if your number of life cards is less than or equal to the number of your opponent's life cards, rest up to one of your opponent's characters at the cost of 4 or less. If you get any of these 2Ks, these will automatically go into the deck. If you get any 2Ks, they should automatically go into the deck, but these are the most playable out of the ones that we've mentioned so far. And then to finish out protection, we have a couple of counter events, which I think are very important to mention. Kamakura Jusashi, probably butchered that name, but please let me know in the comments there. I'm just basing it off of what I see in the art. Counter event, choose up to one of your leader or characters. It gains plus 3,000 power during this battle. Afterwards, one of your opponent's leaders or characters gets minus 2,000 power during this turn. This is actually a very powerful counter event, being able to pump something up by 3,000, but also your opponent's not going to be expected to shrink their character by a little bit, or leader rather. And so because of those two effects, I would really try to consider running this if you can come across it. It's a common, so you'll likely see a few of them in your drafts. Next up, we have a one-cost event called Divine Departure. This actually doubles as a removal spell, and I forgot to add this into the removal section, so this can be considered a removal spell because it has two effects. One, it has a main effect that says you may rest 5 Dawn, so for a total of 6, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with 8,000 power or less. And it also has a counter event that says choose up to one of your leader or characters. I think that's a misprinting because I think it's only leader, and it says it gains plus 3,000 power during this battle. I'm pretty sure that this is only for your leader, not a character, so keep that in mind. But the fact that this has two functions on it, you can choose to either use it as a main or a counter. The flexibility there is really worth running this card. Next up, we have in yellow a 2-cost counter event, Let's Meet in the New World. Once again, don't know if this is actually the translation here, so just base it off of the art if you do come across this. The counter event, it says, give up to one of your leaders or characters plus 4,000 power for this battle. Then if you have 0 life cards, draw 1 card. I think the more important thing here is that it's a 2-cost counter event that's plus 4,000. Very Dawn efficient, and if you are at 0 life cards, you do get that extra card from this card itself. So that's nice. And the other thing is the trigger is KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of equal to or less than your opponent's life cards. So maybe your opponent is at like 2 life and they have a 2-cost blocker, and this is in your life, you can just get rid of that blocker for free. And then finally, the other event that I feel is worth running is the 1-cost counter event called Room. If you have 1 or less life, give up to one of your leader or characters plus 3,000 power for this battle, then set up to one of your cost 5 or lower characters as active. So the fact that this is a 1-cost counter event for plus 3,000, very good efficiency there. And on top of that, you can restand a character. If your opponent's trying to swing into a character, you can actually have them pivot and swing into something else instead, past that certain attack, because then they cannot attack into a 5-cost character that might be rested at that point. You can also do some shenanigans where maybe you want to attack with a blocker, and then you know that you can restand it because of this event, so worth running if that's the case. And then for everything else, usually I just put vanillas in here, but because, once again, this set is very underwhelming, I feel like there are some cards that don't necessarily fit within other sections, but have decent effects, or their stat lines are just kind of like mediocre, but maybe worth running at the end of the day. So let's go over these pretty quickly. We have in green a Zoro that's 5-cost 6,000 power. It's not the best of stats, but it's not the worst of stats either. What's nice here is on the opponent's turn, if you have 2 or more rested characters, this character gains an additional 2,000 power, making it a lot harder for the opponent to remove by swinging into it. In purple, we have a 5-cost Rosinante, so 5-cost 6,000 power, and it says on play you may trash 1 event card from your hand, draw 2 cards, so sometimes there might be a dead event in your hand, and that way you can at least turn that into some card advantage. And the end of your turn, if you have 7 or more Dawn cards, set up to 2 of them as active, so it will allow you to play some events if you do have them in your hand. Also in purple, we have Pika, a 4-cost 5,000 power body. Once per turn, if this character would be KO'd by one of your opponent's effects, you may instead rest 2 of your Dawn. So this is actually pretty efficient if your opponent's trying to remove it through any of the effects that we have talked about earlier in the removal section, and you have 2 Dawn available to rest. You can actually keep this alive for just a cost of 2. In black, we have Burgess. It's a 5-cost 6,000 power body. Dawn times 1 if you have 8 or more cards in your trash, which isn't the hardest to do. This character gains Rush, so that's also a really strong stat line. Downside here is it doesn't have any counter on it, so it is a dead card in your hand otherwise. We have a 4-cost 5,000 power body in Shiryu. This is a 1k counter, and on the opponent's turn, this character gains plus 2,000 power. So yet again, another card that is going to be hard for your opponent to remove through just battle. The activate main once per turn is not going to ever really come up unless you have a Blackbeard Pirate type leader. So if you're running Teach or if you're running Rainbow Luffy, then the effect comes up. Otherwise, you can just ignore it. Next up, we have Ryuma, a 4-cost 6,000 power body that says Dawn times 1. This character gains double attack. I feel like this is almost bomb worthy based off of just how underwhelming this set is, but I don't know if double attack is necessarily the best thing in the world, simply because you are giving your opponent a lot of cards in hand, but it will pressure them at least from subsequent swings to make sure that they don't go too low on life. Ryuma is pretty solid. One of the downsides, though, is it doesn't have a counter. Otherwise, I'd probably add this card upwards of maybe 2 in the deck. I don't want to draw it too often just because it is a dead card, though. In yellow, we have a 3-cost 5,000 power body in Zoro, and it says if your life total is fewer than your opponent's, this character gains Rush. Otherwise, this has a nice vanilla stat line, and of course, it doesn't have a counter on it, which does hurt. The trigger will likely not come up unless you're playing a Supernova-type leader. And then we have the 6-cost 7,000 power Luffy, secret rare. Once per turn, this character cannot be KO'd by your opponent's effects. Not necessarily the most powerful effect in this set because there aren't that many removal pieces that hit 6, but when attacking, you may place 3 cards from your trash to the bottom of your deck in any order. Then if your opponent has 5 or more cards in their hand, your opponent trashes 1 card from their hand. So this can also be an advantage piece in the sense that your opponent is being denied resources by having them trash something from their hand. And then, as I mentioned, vanillas are always good to add to the deck. These cards are going to be cards that have no effect, but have really strong stats for the costs of what they are. So we're looking at 3-cost 5,000 power, 4-cost 6,000 power, 5-cost 7,000 power, 6-cost 8,000 power, and 7-cost 9,000 power. So any of those are usually going to be good, and you're going to want to have a 1k counter on the side of those. Otherwise, I wouldn't consider running any of these cards if they didn't have counter. So that about wraps it up for the review of cards that you should be adding to your deck for pre-release. Hopefully you find some good tips, or at least can review this very quickly before your pre-release and know what cards you should be adding. Keep in mind that this set, I've said it once, I've said it twice, I've said it many times, is very underwhelming as far as the power level goes. So everyone is going to be in an equal boat. I would consider running Sanji, Bonnie, Kid. Any of those leaders are going to be pretty solid overall in this set, especially with a lot of blockers and 2k counters that you might run into. I feel like Kid might actually be a decent option because of the effect of just leaning into your leader ability. Overall, it will be your choice, and hopefully this video has helped you out in some capacity. Let me know how you guys do in the comments. Always keen to hear how the viewers are doing out there. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching as usual. Super excited for 10. I am going to be playing a lot of Usopp and coping with that deck. I hope you guys stick around, and I'll see you guys in future videos.